Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Furiously Curious Show. I'm your host, Calvin Rentberg. This is a show that learns about people's worldviews, beliefs, and stories from people around the world. How I grew up and what I was taught shaped me and what I believe. Now I want to learn about other people's stories, beliefs, worldviews, and how they got there. New episodes drop every other Friday. Today on the show, we have Susan Shoeman along with her husband, Pastor Jack Schoeman. Jack has been the pastor of Emmanuel Free Reformed Church in Abbotsford BC since 2015 and started as pastorate in the year 2000. Together they have 6 children, one of whom, their daughter Catherine, passed away in January 2017 at the age of 15. Thank you both for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
So today I want to talk about the topic of grief, as you guys know a lot about. So maybe to start us off, could you tell a little bit about Catherine and what happened in January 2 years ago?
Yeah, well, we were both at separate locations, so maybe you want to start maybe the night before she passed away, because there were certain things that happened and that were said the night before that were really quite, at the time we didn't realize how significant it was, but there was some significance to it looking back, and then I can maybe explain where I was when I found out the news, and then Susan can explain where she was.
Yeah, we were going to have people over on the Friday night, just a get-together of a few ministers and students, and there was also a games night at the church, so the young people were playing with the seniors. And anyway, so I'd just been busy cleaning the house the week before, and I focused on the rec room. And I think on the Wednesday, I went in, and there's Catherine absolutely surrounded with her Playmobil. And I know she was 15, but she still loved her Playmobil, just to check it out every now and again. And she had a lot of horses and stables because she was born in Alberta, and she's an Albertan at heart. Yeah. And I said, "What are you doing with all of this stuff?" Like, she hadn't played with it for a while. And I said, "What are you doing with it?" And she just made a mess of my rec room again. And she just looked at me. She said, "I'm never going to play with this again. So I'm just sorting it out and putting it away." And, I never really passed any comment other than, "Oh, she's growing up," and that was it. And then the next day I went up to her room, and she's sitting on the floor surrounded with her American Girl doll and all the accessories and clothes. And I said, "What are you doing now? You've just made a mess of your room now, right?" So I was like, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm not going to play with this either. I'm putting it all away." And again, it was just one of those bizarre moments that, came back later. Mm-hmm. So that was on the Thursday. And then on the Friday night, she was over at the church quite a bit. On the Friday, I was just cleaning up my living room, getting ready for everybody coming, and I had bought a set of frames probably 5 or 6 months before, and I had wanted to print out a prayer from the Valley of Vision, which is a collection of Puritan prayers. It was absolutely beautiful prayer, and so there were 5 frames, and I wanted to print it out and cut it up. And so I thought, I'm a chronic procrastinator when it comes to stuff like that. So I thought, Friday night, everybody's coming over, I'm just going to do it. Yeah. So I did it on Friday afternoon, and before Catherine went over to do the games night, she looked at it. It was right by my chair, and she said, "I really love it." She said, "That's a beautiful prayer." And it was. And then when she came back from that evening, just before she went to bed, about 9:30, and she leaned over to give me a kiss goodnight. I was sitting in my chair, and she looked at it, and she read it. She kind of read it over again, and then in this one little frame, it said, "This day will bring me nearer home." And she actually read it out, and she said, "Mom, I love that. Like, just that thought that every day will bring you closer to home." And, that was just a random thing she said. Yeah. But less than 12 hours later, she was home, right? So it was, of course, then the Lord brings that back with tremendous poignancy afterwards. And then the other thing was that night, Catherine would go to bed at 9:30, but still at like 10:30, she was wandering around. And then she came out and she says, "Mom, I don't think I'm going to go. Kind of nervous, kind of a little bit scared. Yeah. I don't think I'm going to go." And I said, "Catherine, you have been talking about this for so long. She wanted to go the year before, but couldn't because she'd pulled some ligaments in her ankle.
And that was snowboarding with friends at Manning.
That was skiing at Manning with the church group.
Yeah.
And she had wanted to go already the year before and hadn't been able to.
Yeah.
So I knew she'd been looking forward to this for over a year. And I said, you know what, Catherine, I know, you might be a little bit scared or whatever, but I said, this last minute jitters, I think you should just go. And I said, if you don't, you're going to regret it afterwards. And those words have haunted me because I just, in my own heart, because I tend to be an overprotective mother, I would have said, oh no, stay home with me, because I knew I was going to be home alone the next day anyway. So I said, just stay home. Yeah, I wanted to say stay home with me, but the right response was just go, to sort of let her spread her wings a little. But yeah, it was just a difficult thing. And then they packed up and left really early the next morning.
Yeah.
And I think they had to be in Chilliwack. I think they were meeting, I don't even remember where they were meeting anymore. One of the churches.
Yeah.
I think they had to meet there at like 7 o'clock or whatever. So they left early, and she left with, Catherine was a little bit scatterbrained in the mornings and never was really that organized. And the boys were in the car, and
her siblings went with her as well?
Yeah.
Some siblings?
Andrew and Matthew, her two older brothers, were there. And she went flying out the front door, and scarves and things trailing behind her. And but her last words were, we said, have a really nice day. And she says, oh, I will. And, I love you, and, everything else. And so it's just, that was her typical farewell. Just, she was very lovable and loving, and a little bit on the ditzy side, but just super sweet and fun. So, that was, I waved until the car went over the hill, and that was it. Never saw her
on the way
again.
to Manning, she was talking to a friend about heaven.
Actually, it was very interesting because it wasn't really a conversation about heaven. It was, she was actually having a little bit of a conversation, a debate about whether you should wear head coverings in the worship service, of all things. Yeah. And they were talking, and this conversation went on almost right until they went through the gates at Manning Park.
Okay.
And one of the last things Catherine said was, but you're supposed to wear one because of the angels.
Okay.
And at that point, she stopped and said, I wonder what heaven is like. And then less than an hour later, she knew.
Wow.
Right? So there were a lot of things that happened that didn't really pay much attention to. And then all of a sudden, it of course, it comes back with tremendous clarity and, again, poignancy. So
before we go to what happened on Manning Park there, was she professed to be a Christian from a young age?
Yeah, she always loved the Lord. All of our kids did when they were
going
younger.
To church.
Yeah. Particularly the church we were in Abbotsford. She would come through the door every Sunday morning and just, she was a very flamboyant person, so she would just sort of burst into the house and slam the door behind her, and she would just say, I just love our church. So that is one of the sweet memories we have of her. But Catherine was very, very open. Okay. Very open about her faith. We have heard repeatedly that she witnessed to others at work. She worked at Devon's Greenhouses in Abbotsford. Yep. She would often tell me about conversations she'd had with people that she wanted to witness to. So we knew her heart. She was very open and very honest, which I'm so thankful for. We never had to wonder where she was. Yep. So, and we've heard since then, so many people have confirmed it as well.
Talk about it,
we homeschool our kids, and she did have some conversations with some of her students from her online school. Okay. And she would vehemently defend her Reformed faith. Okay.
5 points of Calvinism all the way.
Yeah. So sometimes I would, be cleaning up the living room, and I would find this clipboard with so many scripture verses, just entire pages of scripture verses. And I would say, what is all this? Oh, that's for our next debate, right? But
does that come from you or her? Who's that from?
Probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Her teacher, one of her teachers said that, they'd never had someone like her defending, Reformed faith, because most of the other kids weren't. And he said, but she always did it in a very winsome way. She was always very kind. So.
Because Jack, you wrote a letter to the editor a couple of weeks afterwards that I read today, and you said it wasn't just that she went to church on Sundays and that she read her Bible and things like that, but she loved it. Can you expound on that a little bit? more what you meant when you wrote that?
Yeah, thanks for that. Because, based on what Susan said, you can almost get the impression that we think that she's with the Lord simply because she took an interest in doctrine and church. But it was, with Catherine, it was way deeper than that. Catherine was a girl that felt deeply about everything, including the Lord. And she just loved the Lord. I don't know how else to put it. She didn't have a dramatic, sudden conversion experience, but she just gradually, as she was exposed to the gospel, she responded to it in faith, and she just wanted to serve the Lord and was excited about His kingdom and excited about sharing the gospel with others. She was, Susan mentioned she worked at Devon greenhouses, and there were a lot of East Indian ladies there working side by side, and she was openly sharing the gospel with them at lunchtime. And so it lived in her heart, and the evidence was there that she was a born again child of God.
It wasn't a list of do's and don'ts. It was a relationship.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So what happened? She was skiing or snowboarding or
Skiing.
skiing? Okay.
Yeah. It was.
It was her first run.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. She had skied before in Ontario, but they were just sort of like, it's not. Yeah, they're not big mountains like they are here,
No.
right?
They think they are, but they're not.
They're really not. That's right. I know. And I was obviously nervous. I don't like our kids doing anything like that. If I could just bubble wrap them, I've always, been very protective. But she had her helmet on. Some of the kids were checking each other's helmets, and Catherine had hers on. Hers was the tightest of the group.
Okay.
And so she did have a helmet on. The witnesses all said that, because she was skiing with friends, and they said that she was going really, really slowly.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden it was just, she went out of control. And I just don't think she knew how to get out of it.
And she hit a tree?
Yeah.
Okay. And then it was just impact on the head?
She hit several trees, but the coroner said afterwards that that really she was gone on impact, on her first impact.
Wow.
So, you know what? Ski Patrol was there. They responded immediately. Well, first of all, she was skiing with two people from her church group. And one guy was able to locate her. And one girl had seen her have the accident, and then she flagged a guy down, and he was able to go in and find her and kind of bring her, I guess, closer to where she could get help. And then...
Because I guess her friends kept skiing. I guess usually they kind of...
Well, no, because the one girl stopped, and she was able to stop and then flag down the next person. Okay. And then within minutes, Ski Patrol was there, and they actually do have a paramedic that volunteers his time there. And so within a very short space of time, she was receiving a lot of help. And then they sent an ambulance crew from Hope and another one from Princeton. And then they sent in a medical, like a helicopter from Royal Columbian. We know that they worked really, really hard to save her.
Hours, I think.
Yeah. They said, we talked to this one guy from Manning Park, and he said, honestly, it was like NASA. He said that it was so professional. It was so well done. And I know from the coroner that she was already gone. But it's wonderful to know that they did everything that they could, right? Because then too, you have this confidence that as much as they worked hard on her, her days were up. Her days had already been written in a book. Yeah. And God had taken her home. And I believe it's in the book of Job that basically it says no one can thwart the plans of God. Mm-hmm. And it was God's plan to take her home. It doesn't matter how much time or energy they spent working on her. It was her time to go. So
two of your boys were up there with her,
yes,
and a whole bunch of friends. Do you know how that went for them and stuff like that? Because obviously your friend, you're not expecting that. So
no, I think the chaperones were. They were all waiting. Catherine was in the first aid hut, and the paramedics were all working on her. Andrew and Matthew were up there. It was actually really beautiful because a friend of ours from Alberta, Jim Greendyke.
Okay, yeah.
He's a pastor in the Heritage Churches, and we had known him. Our boys had known him since they were literally 2 and 1 years old.
Okay.
And he was with them. And so they were getting pastoral support
Okay.
from him and from someone who had known
They already
them.
knew, like when she was in the
They didn't know. Someone had
Okay.
told them, there's been an accident. Catherine got hurt.
Okay.
And they skied down and went right away to the first aid, or
Okay.
to a waiting area
Yeah,
by
yeah.
the first aid hut.
Yeah.
And then Green Dykes were with them.
Okay.
And they waited for quite some time. And I think it was close to the end when Andrew told me that he was just convinced that, she'd just broken a leg or something. And then he asked closer to the end, like, it doesn't look good, does it? And Jim Green Dyke said no.
He knew already?
I think he had a premonition, just being older, I guess, that because it was taking so long, and he's probably reading people's faces or whatever. And anyway, and he said, Andrew, I think you need to prepare yourself for bad news. As to how and then it was announced that she had passed away. And honestly, I don't really feel comfortable sharing what happened with the boys.
That's fine.
They were just absolutely devastated,
Yeah,
obviously. I think it was very difficult for them because obviously their sister had just died and they were processing this, but also because they didn't know what we would expect them to do because there was no communication, because Manning Park, there's no cell phone service there. So they felt that they needed to stay because they didn't know what we were going to do, whether we were going to go up there or whatever. And so they just, I think they felt very much, what would Mom want us to do? And I don't think Mom would want us to leave Catherine.
So what time was this, roughly? First round of the day, that must have been 10, 11.
She died sometime between 9 and 9:30. They're
Okay.
thinking probably around 9:15, 9:20.
Okay.
I guess
By the
with
time
all
though
panic.
by the time the boys found out, that was probably closer to.
It was
11
around.
or so.
It was just after 11
Okay.
when they find out, and then I find out a quarter after 2.
Oh, wow. How much
Because
longer
they had,
after?
they just didn't have cell phone service, and and I guess they had to locate. Then they called Abbotsford Police, and then Abbotsford Police, they need to have victim support workers in place because they never know who they're going to meet with, and it was the weekend, and I think they just had a hard time getting all those people together. So
And where were you when you guys found out?
I was in Vancouver.
Okay.
I was attending Missions Fest in Vancouver, and I had the 3 youngest children with me, Anna and Lydia and Nathaniel. We kind of were going to make a bit of a day out of it. And we parked the car actually in Surrey, and then we took the SkyTrain in. The kids found that kind of fun, and so we took that into the city, and I had just finished my volunteer time there because I was advertised. We set up a table every year there to promote the work of the Banner of Truth radio broadcast.
Okay.
Which is the denominational radio ministry that I'm a part of. And it was just when I finished my 2 hours behind the table that we actually went downstairs. I took the kids out for a bite to eat at the food court. And we were at the food court. The kids were looking around, deciding what they wanted to eat. And then my cell phone rang, and it was my colleague, John Koopman from Chilliwack FRC. And I'll never forget. I mean, I had a hard time hearing him, a hard time making him out because it was so noisy in the food court. And I just said, John, I can't hear you. I'll call you right back. And so I went into a quiet place, which, looking back, I think it was providential because it separated me from the kids and it gave me some privacy. And I found this little area. There was an elevator there that went up to the hotel, and it was just an enclosed area. And I called him back, and John just moaned on the phone. It was literally, he just said, "Oh, Jack, oh, Jack." I said, "John, what's going on? What's going on?" He said, "Catherine." That's all he could say. And right away I knew, and I just collapsed on the floor. It was just overwhelming. I remember a lady coming out of the elevator, and she saw me and she said, "Are you all right?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Of course, I wasn't fine.
Yeah.
But I composed myself because I didn't want the 3 younger children to know. I wanted to get them out of the food court. So I just gathered them together. We never had lunch. They hadn't ordered anything, thankfully. And I said, we need to go. There's been an accident, and we need to get home.
The extent of your conversation with John when he told you was very short. He just,
Yeah, it was very short. So then I didn't know what to do because I didn't have a car there. The car was parked in Surrey, and I didn't want to take the SkyTrain home.
Wow.
So I went back upstairs to the room where the Missions Fest was being held, and I talked to my colleague Tom Aiken, who was taking over for me, and I told him what happened, and I asked him to take us home. And still the kids didn't know anything about it. And so anyway, we got to his car. We had to walk for ages. It was just horrible. He was parked several blocks away, and then he couldn't quite remember where the car was, and we were going through this parking garage.
Were your kids like asking, like, what are we doing? What are we
No,
doing?
the kids were just very quiet. They knew it was serious, but they didn't want to ask me any questions. And so we got into Tom's car, and just before we got on the freeway, I was just ready to burst. I just said, Tom, you have to pull over. I need to tell my kids. So I took the kids out of the car. We stopped off at a Petro-Canada station, and I just took them out of the car, and I told them. And there was a cry of sorrow. But the kids were so good, we composed ourselves, and then we traveled the rest of the way back home. We didn't say a word. There wasn't a word spoken in the car. And by the time we got home, Susan was there, and there was some people from the church that were there in the house, in the parsonage. And that's what happened. Yeah.
And had you guys talked at all on that drive home? You guys hadn't been in communication at all yet?
We hadn't even spoken. No. Well, I had 2 police officers and 2 victim support workers sitting in my living room. And the police officers were trying to get a hold of Jack, and the victim support workers were trying to make sure that I was okay, and there were people arriving, and so...
Well, the police were there too.
The police were
right?
still there, yeah.
You were home when you found out?
I was home alone.
Okay.
Yeah. And, we live in Mount Lehman Road in Abbotsford, and there have been a number of police incidents in the area, and so all of a sudden I saw this police cruiser pull in. And I thought, oh, interesting. I wonder what they find, And I was kind of surreptitiously trying to look, through the window and everything, find out what was going on. And then a white minivan pulled up, and these 2 people got out of a white minivan, and they had lanyards around their neck, and they looked kind of official. And then the policeman got out of his cruiser, and they looked at the house, and I knew. And I just ran to the door, and I said, it's my kids. And they said, they were still way at the very end of the walk, and they just said, are you Susan? And I said, yeah. I said, it's my kids. Just tell me. I just need to know. And they wouldn't tell me anything until we'd come into the house. And I kept just saying, just please tell me. Please tell me. Yep. And then they got in, and they said, we want you to sit down. And I was like, I don't want to sit down. And I said, just please tell me. And they said, please sit. So I sat. And I said, please just don't tell me in 100 words. Just tell me.
Yeah.
And one of the police officers, who we found out later was a Christian, just kind of turned his back away a little bit. And he just said, your daughter, Catherine, died. That was it. And, you're just devastated. Like, you just can't. My first reaction was, not her. I was really close to Catherine. She was just at that age where...
You actually didn't believe it.
Well,
right?
I didn't, but initially it was like, not Catherine. And then my next immediate thought was, but I was sure of her. Of all of my kids, I think at that point I was probably most sure of Catherine, that she was spiritually going to be okay. She was going to be with the Lord. She was ready to go. But, she had just turned 15. Yep. She was beautiful. She was fun. She was spunky. She was everything that you could have possibly wished for in a daughter. And she just had got to that point where she thought I was amazing. Like,
Nice.
Right? You look forward to that time when your kids stop thinking you're a bit of an ogre and you're actually fun and you're a friend and it's fun to go shopping. Like, she was just a special girl. Like, if you go into the mall, she'd just grab my hand and say, Catherine, no other teenager grabs her mom's hand at the mall. And she says, I don't care. I love you. Like, that's the kind of girl she was. So she was very special. And, but that was my first thought, was not Catherine. My second thought immediately was, I was sure of her. And then...
It's a beautiful second thought.
Yeah. And then my next thought was, and I said this to the police officer, like, what do I do? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I literally felt that just, my heart had just turned to lead. So, and I know, looking back on it, I was just in shock and numb. And I kept telling them I was fine. And I asked them if they wanted coffee. And then they said, you need to call family. And I said, well, call family so that someone can come and look after you guys. I'm like, well, we don't have family here. And he said, well, call someone that can care for you. So there's an elderly woman from our church. Well, she's not that old, but
Older woman.
older. And I called her, and she said she'd come right over.
You told her on the phone?
Yeah. And the one thing that really shocked me was, I knew the police weren't lying. I knew the police would be sure before they deliver news like that. And I knew they weren't lying. But it bothered me that everybody believed it. Everyone I called believed it, except for one person in Ontario. And that was the one reaction that resonated with me, because, like, finally, somebody doesn't believe me. Somebody thinks I'm lying. And it felt comforting, I think. Yeah, and then all of a sudden everybody started to come, and then it was just busy.
So when did it go from when did it go from the thing of, like, asking people if they want coffee to it actually sinks in? I guess it slowly sinks in over time more and more, but, like, that initial reaction, like this.
The initial reaction was, I believed it. Something changed in me at that moment. You know that you're broken. You know that you're utterly shattered into a million pieces. And I knew that, but I didn't know the full extent of the pain. And I think that's a blessing from God. Okay. I think the numbness, the shock and the numbness is absolutely a gift. But it comes incrementally. I would say, yeah, the funeral, obviously, it changed, there's something changes. I mean, you see your child in the ground. Like, it's just, for me, I think it was the Thursday afterwards was the first time we actually got to see her. It was a problem because she was 15, and then the adult pathologist didn't really want to do the postmortem, and then the pediatric pathologist didn't really feel comfortable because, I don't know, it was just a really awkward age, and it was over the weekend, and we had 2 coroners working on it, and so it was just really complicated. A lot of people flew in. There was a major snowstorm, the worst snowstorm in 70 years was that weekend.
Remember that?
It was just horrific. So there was just a lot to think about. So I think after the funeral, I think it started to sink in a little bit more. For me, I noticed a real difference at 3 weeks.
Okay.
At 3 weeks, I began to realize the magnitude of the loss more than anything.
There's less
That was the difference between me and Susan, because my grief was just overwhelming suddenly and in the initial stages. And I was actually
Bugged.
a little bugged at Susan, because she just seemed to be so stoical, so in control, and and I was just a basket case. I couldn't do anything. But then it really hit you.
Then the roles were totally reversed, because then he was stronger. I couldn't even make the smallest decision. Like, I was just, I think when 3 weeks hit, I couldn't make any decisions at all. I mean, I have a good friend that we've been friends for, I don't know, probably at that point about 18 years. And she was flying out from Ontario to visit her daughter who was at Trinity. And she said, I'm coming out. This was about 4 weeks after the funeral, I think. And she says, you know what, it gives me an opportunity, because they flew out for the funeral and then flew back out again for the scheduled flight. And she said, Susan, I just want to be there for you, and maybe we would go for a walk. And I couldn't even decide to go for a walk with her. I said, Jack, you're going to have to take care of it. And I wanted him to be with me for everything. And I really didn't feel I could function at all. And yet I had to because I still had kids.
Yeah.
And yet when I look back at some of the things we did, like our kids, our 3 girls always shared a bedroom. They were very, very close. The girls were very close together.
So Catherine was 15 and
Catherine was 15. Lydia was 13 months younger.
Okay.
And then Anna was 18 months younger than that.
Wow.
So they've always shared a room. They've always done everything together. The girls were very close. And they all shared a room. So our youngest daughter, she couldn't even go into that room without completely falling apart. So they slept in the guest room. And they weren't sleeping well. And Jack and I made the decision that we needed to get them back into their room. But how we were going to do that, we didn't know. But one thing we learned very early on is no matter how much your heart yearns for the child that you don't have, the living has to come before the dead. And it's a horrible, horrible thing to realize. But we knew that whatever we wanted to do with Catherine's things, Lydia and Anna were more important at that point. So at 4 weeks after Catherine died, we sent the girls off for a sleepover at their Oma's house, their adopted Oma's house in Abbotsford. And we painted, I bought new comforters, and we took apart Catherine's bed. We packed up all of her stuff.
Wow.
At 4 weeks. I know. So, but those are things you just have to do. It was brutal.
That must have been a brutal day.
Yeah. It was. And there were a lot of tears when we brought the kids home. But it was the right thing to do. Yeah.
Because I even have with my daughter Grace, in a completely different situation. We didn't want to do anything with the crib.
Mm-hmm. I know.
Or I still don't. I mean, it's I use it as my office now, that room. And I'm just like, I don't even actually want to do this because like you feel like you're losing more and more the more you let these things go.
I know. Well, we did move everything. We did move everything from downstairs because when people would come across Catherine's things, it would be really upsetting. So we did move everything up to her room because we thought that was easier. But yeah, I mean, it was just the way she left it. And I in particularly did not want to touch anything. I wanted to leave everything the way she had left it that morning, but we couldn't. So I went out to Home Depot and I bought a bunch of moving boxes, and I was the one that was adamant, I don't want to clean this stuff away. I want to leave it exactly the way she left it. But somebody had to do it, and so I got to put everything away. And the thing that comforted me a little bit was, I'm only putting this away temporarily. When we have more time and the girls are happy in their room again, then I'll go through it all again. So it wasn't put away for good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's right. You still can go to it.
Yeah.
So when you came home, Jack, you guys remember your first words to each other? I'm sure you just...
There wasn't any.
Any words, yeah.
No. The kids jumped out of the car first and then I just met them at the door, and
we just all held each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the living room was full. I didn't want them coming in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really tough. I think the other thing you don't always understand is that grief is just so all encompassing. Like there's a physical aspect to grief as well. And so, I literally hurt. My heart hurt. I couldn't eat. My eyes hurt, my head hurt, everything hurt, and I wasn't breathing. I remember praying every night and just reminding the Lord that because I knew I wasn't breathing. My breathing was so shallow before I went to sleep, and I thought, well, if I'm not remembering to breathe when I'm sleeping, then I'm just not going to breathe. And I remember just praying every night before I went to sleep. If I don't make it, that's okay. I'm okay. But if you want me to wake up in the morning, then you're going to have to breathe for me. So, yeah.
Before we go on to another subject, but I want to say that the staff at Manning were just absolutely first class, professional, caring, unbelievable.
I think
the support we had from them.
But I think they were really affected too. I mean, this was their first accidental death.
Oh.
They had I think 2 other older men who had taken heart attacks when they were skiing or snowboarding or whatever.
Okay, yeah.
But this was the first accidental death, and they really didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
And they told us that, and they had called Whistler to find out, what protocols they had in place. But, I think the fact was that they were just so kind.
Yeah.
they
some
weren't.
of them attended the funeral.
Yeah.
They sent a huge bouquet of flowers,
Yeah.
I remember. They were just excellent.
Yeah,
really.
but we saw so much kindness afterwards. I mean, the RCMP officer that was on scene that day, he wanted to deliver Catherine's belongings himself. He's from the RCMP detachment in Princeton, Michael Dolman, and he was very kind. The coroners were very kind.
Yeah.
I think the coroners were very patient with me. Of course, I mean, I hadn't even seen Catherine. They just listened to me at a. I don't even think I made any sense to them. But anyway, they were very kind.
Even months later, remember when
Yeah.
You got the phone call that they had found something?
Yeah.
Maybe, that would be interesting
Yeah.
to tell Carl.
We always talk about. I mean, I always say that the love of God was really overwhelming. I just had such a sense of the love of God at that time.
Like months after, or like right after, or
almost right after.
Okay.
It was really weird.
And what does the love of God mean to you? It can mean a lot of different things to different people.
Okay, so I know that God loves me.
Okay.
He sent his son to die on the cross for me, for my sins,
Yeah.
so that I could be acceptable to God, to a holy God, even though I don't deserve it. And I know that. I know that God loves me. The Bible tells me that God loves me. I know that God loves me. But at that time, there was this feeling that, and it's hard for me to explain, but there was this feeling when people asked me how I was, I said to them, I feel absolutely cocooned in God's love. I feel like nothing can harm me. I feel that nothing can perturb me. I feel I had a peace from the very beginning, an absolute peace about what had happened. And that is really bizarre.
I did too, actually. I mean, I said earlier that that I had collapsed on the floor, and that's true. But as soon as John told me what happened, I can't explain it, but I felt, I just had this overwhelming sense. It was like the Lord was saying, Jack, it's okay. It's okay. Not only will you get through this, but Catherine is okay. Mm-hmm. I can't explain it. It was just this sense of the presence of God and the peace of God. It was really quite overwhelming.
Yeah, and his love and kindness. I think there were so many things. I mean, I could sit here for the next 10 hours and tell you all the things that happened afterwards. Special ways that God really was kind to us, really tender.
Yeah.
One of those ways Jack just brought up was we had to wait quite some time to get Catherine's belongings back. And again, it was because the RCMP officer wanted to deliver them himself. Okay. Which was very nice. But we had to wait a little bit until that all worked out.
It was months, actually.
Yeah. But when he came, her glasses weren't there. And, some of the stuff had been left at Manning Park. Some of the stuff had been with the coroner. The police had the rest. And it just took a while for everybody to get everything there. And so it was all being held at Princeton Detachment. And then, so when he brought everything back, her glasses weren't there. And so I felt uncomfortable with that because, not that it mattered, I suppose. It certainly didn't matter to Catherine anymore. But it was just that thought for me that something belonging to Catherine was just out on the side of a mountain. Like we didn't care. Mm-hmm. So I had phoned Mike Barker, who was the manager of Manning Park at that point, and he was just amazing. He was so kind. Yep. And I asked him if he had seen these glasses, and he said no. And he said there was still quite a bit of snow there. So this was March. Yeah. End of March, I think. And he said, we'll look for them. And I said, no, Mike, I don't want you doing anything else. You guys have done so much. Yep. Just let me know when the snow melts, and then I'll come up and look for them. And I didn't want to go back to Manning Park at that point. We had
been a few days after
Thursday.
Catherine. Susan's family had come out from Northern Ireland, and they wanted to see the place where she died. And we
wanted to thank everyone too.
Yeah, so we actually went up there. Oh yeah, that's also interesting too. So we actually saw the exact spot where she, from a distance. I didn't want to go any closer, but Anyhow, sorry I interrupted.
But anyway, then in April, we got a phone call from Mike, and he said, "Susan, I think we found our glasses." So they had gone looking for them, and actually it was Mike, and then 3 other guys that had been with Catherine that day, so they had all gone out together looking for it. Yeah. And
Mike had reached out to these guys and asked them, or how did they know?
No, Mike had just asked them, I guess, or he said that I had put in a call and they volunteered or whatever.
Okay.
But they were great. Like they were there to help Catherine, and then they met with us on the Thursday. So there was just a connection there. Anyway, they find her glasses, and he described, and I said, yeah, they're Catherine's. And then he said, we find something else, and he said, but I don't know whether it was Catherine's or whether it was somebody else's or whether somebody left it there as a little memorial to Catherine. I don't know. But he said, it's a bracelet. I'm thinking, we packed Catherine's stuff away in such a hurry. I didn't notice that that she was missing anything. And then he said, it's got turquoise beads. And I'm like, that's Catherine's. And he said, there's a little metal plaque on it that says, it is well with my soul.
Oh, wow.
So, it was those things. I didn't need confirmation that Catherine was okay, but just...
Is that why you put that on a gravestone? No, it's not.
Yeah,
That
it
is on a
is.
gravestone.
It is.
And you didn't know that at the time.
Well, we did. But
okay.
It was actually, but it was, I hadn't even thought of that bracelet.
Okay.
I had bought it for her and given it to her for her birthday.
Okay.
On December 4th, so just a
just
little
prior
over
to
a
that.
month before. And she'd worn it every day.
Well, she saw it in the store.
She saw it in a
really liked
store,
it.
yeah. She saw it in a store, and she was buying it for a friend of hers for a birthday party, and then she wanted one for herself. And, as a mom, you just always want to be sure, and you just always want to talk to them. And I said, well, Catherine, you know what? It's a beautiful bracelet, but there are others here, too, if you want something different. She said, no, I want that one. And I said, it has to be true for you, before you can wear something. You can't wear something like that if it's not well with your soul. And she just flicked her head, and she had beautiful blonde hair, and she just flicked her hair, and she said, oh, Mom, she says, I can wear that bracelet. It's fine. So again, that was just a memory that, that the Lord brought back to me based on this bracelet being found. So, and then it was our youngest son. We took a long time to decide about the headstone. It's a really hard final decision to make, and we wanted it to be a family decision, so it took a long time to decide on it. And then our youngest son said, Mom, I really want to put it as well with my soul on the bottom of the headstone, because he said it's almost like it was Catherine's last words to us. So we did. Yeah.
So you guys mentioned both that you really felt cocooned in God's love after losing your daughter. So that might seem really confusing to a lot of people. Because I think there's going to be people listening to this that have lost children or other family members, and they're angry with God, first of all, for taking their family member away. And the last thing they feel is, after God did this to them, love from God. So maybe unpack that a little bit, like what that means and how that works, and for people listening.
First of all, I would say anyone who has lost a child and is angry, I would not judge that. I think it is the most devastating thing, because a part of you is gone, and a part of you dies, and a part of you, it'll scab over, but you'll never be better. You'll never be what you were before. So it is a devastating thing. So I do understand people being angry. Because I think there's this need, I think there can be a need to blame someone.
Yeah.
Because if you don't blame someone, you blame yourself. And I know that. I signed Catherine's waiver form for her skiing. And I know it wasn't a death warrant. That would be a stupid thing to say, but it honestly felt, because I signed that I was responsible. So I think every parent feels guilt that they couldn't keep their child alive. And if you start blaming yourself, it's a hole from which I think it would be very, very difficult to recover from that. And so I think instinctively you want to blame someone else. I made a decision very early on that I wasn't going to blame anyone else, but it was a mental decision. Because I know how easy it is to go down that route, and it leads to bitterness, and it leads to delay in the healing process, I think.
reading through the book of Job meant a lot to us after Catherine passed away. I know Catherine or Susan pored over the book of Job word for word, and I was particularly struck by the first chapter after Job's children had all died. All of his children died in a single day, and reading that chapter, you're confronted with two responses to grief. There's the response of Job's wife, who said, "Curse God and die." Mm-hmm. That's the response of bitterness and anger. I imagine his wife with clenched fist, angry with God. And there's a part of me that gets that. I understand that reaction. Thankful that by God's grace I never experienced that. Because it is only by his grace that you're prevented from that. And then the other reaction is Job. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. It is this I wouldn't say stoic. It's not stoicism. It's acceptance. It's trusting in God's providence that he knows what's best. And it is his right. He is the sovereign God. He gave us Catherine for 15 years. We delighted in her. She was a gift from God. But because she was from him, it took me a while, but eventually I got there to realize that he had every right to do with her whatever he pleased. And that takes a while to get to that point. But we both came to that point. Somebody gave us a book by Samuel Rutherford, and Rutherford wrote a lot of letters to people who had lost children. Of course, back in the 1700s, 1600s, many people lost children. Okay. And so he wrote a lot of letters, and I remember the one illustration that he used again and again was that of a garden, a flower garden. And he says, the Lord has planted a garden. He's given us this garden to enjoy. And he was talking about our children. But he says, because the Lord planted the garden, he fertilized it, he looked after it, he can come along and he can pluck whatever flowers he wants out of that garden and put them in his home. And I thought, that gives me some perspective. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if there's someone listening that has lost children that's not a Christian and is deeply suffering, obviously, because of it, and they think to themselves, I would love to have some peace, or even though they might be angry and be mad at God at the same time, I can imagine them saying, I want to be cocooned in God's love and have some closure. What do you say to those people?
They need to believe the gospel. They need to have a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. That peace that passes all understanding only comes by way of faith and trust in him. I don't know what else to say, but that's where real hope and comfort in this life can only be found in the gospel.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing for me was, this may seem really bizarre, but I felt like a child when Catherine died. Like I couldn't make decisions. I really struggled with a lot of different things, and I think it was just the fatherly characteristics of God that really spoke to me at that time. I just wanted someone. I know this might seem a little bit cheesy, but I needed someone to look after me, to care for me, and someone who knew what I was feeling. And God the Father gave his son to die, and I can't fathom that. Yeah. So for me, it was those aspects of God's nature that really comforted me at that time.
And it was also just the fundamental truths of the gospel. Mm-hmm. Susan often has said, what really comforted me was just, those basic truths that we confess every Sunday. Yeah. In Reformed churches, we read the Apostles' Creed in the afternoon service, and I don't think I've ever read the Apostles' Creed with as much conviction as I did in the weeks after Catherine's death, especially those parts. I believe in the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. And I remember the first time I read those words after Catherine passed away, and I just broke down on the pulpit. Mm-hmm. And but those words, like those fundamental truths, that's what gets you through. It's doctrine. that gets you through difficult
I always
days.
told people that it's doctrine and discipline. It doesn't sound very romantic or sweet or anything, or emotional, but it's doctrine and discipline. Because, look, I know the Bible. I think I know a fair bit about doctrine. But when your child dies tragically, there are things that you want to be true that just aren't true. Like when I was out in my garden about 6-7 weeks afterwards, and it was more than that, a few months afterwards, and there's a beautiful white butterfly in my garden, right close to me as I'm sitting there. People say, yep, your loved one is in the butterfly, they're coming to visit you. You have no idea how much I want that to be true. Yeah. I do. I want to believe that with my whole heart. I want to believe that Catherine is right there with me, but she's not. I mean, I can take that butterfly and I can say, there are 3 stages in the life of this animal. There's the caterpillar, there's the chrysalis stage, and then there's the butterfly stage. And I can look at it and say, we're all going to be butterflies. Catherine's a chrysalis. She's removed from me. I can't see her. And I'm still just a caterpillar, munching away, unaware of what's going to happen next. But, I can take those lessons and teach myself. But my heart yearned for things that I knew weren't true. But it's what my head had to keep saying, that's not true. That's, and you just have to keep sort of preaching to yourself. I know it sounds really strange, but the other thing I did a lot of was I read a lot. I have 2 favorite authors, and one is Elizabeth Elliot, who passed away recently, wife of Jim Elliot. Yeah. And she has, her life has been marked by trial and suffering, and she has a wonderful perspective on it. She was always one of my favorite authors. So I took every book belonging to Elizabeth Elliot off my shelf and read through them. And also, another favorite author of mine is Elizabeth Prentice. She's a much older writer, but her writings really appeal to me, and again, deals a lot with trial and suffering and the proper Christian response to it. And I just kept reading those books.
Helps a lot.
Yeah, and I was just convinced that if I kept putting good in, that some good would come out eventually. Yeah. But it was a discipline. I mean, there are days when I just want to stay in bed and pull the covers over my head, but I had other children. I had to get up. Yeah. And there were many, many, many mornings where I woke up super early in the morning, and then your mind just goes to that day at Manning Park, and you try to imagine what it was like and what Catherine felt, and you can't go there. You would destroy yourself. So then you just get up and start working and doing something. And it's not working just not to think about it. I am absolutely convinced that the best way to get through grief is to go through it and meet every single thing head on, no matter how difficult it is. So it's not the easy way out. It's just having to do it.
What role do other people have in comforting and helping people like yourselves, many other people, of course, that deal with grief? So I guess initially, and also now you're 2 years on. I mean, I think of a couple in the church I attend. I think it's more than 20 years on. I'm sure it's still just as fresh. I don't know. I've never lost. I think she was 18 when she passed away. Is there a role? Like, I think there is a role, but like how do you help? Especially when you're not super close, like a best friend where they know you and they know how to help you. But if you're a little farther removed, you're a good acquaintance. How do you? I think I mentioned earlier, like if I see you in the grocery store, like do you say something? Do you not say something? How do you help?
Always say something.
Okay. Always say something.
Specifically about Catherine, or around that area.
Yeah.
Or about you, how are you doing? There's nothing wrong with asking that question,
Okay.
It just lets people it lets you know that people are still thinking about you, and they're still concerned about you. But at the end of the day, what I've learned is that grief is a lonely journey. Mm-hmm. And everybody grieves differently. I grieve differently than Susan does, and we're still working through that. And the words that people say, as well-meaning, as well-intentioned as they are, they don't bring comfort.
I know this may
but
seem...
it would be worse if they didn't ask.
Yes. But what I found was in the first week or two, the first weeks,
Yep.
I found it very unhelpful. And this may seem very strange coming from a minister's wife. I found it very unhelpful to have scripture verses quoted.
Oh, interesting.
The ones that I found comforting were the ones that God brought to my mind himself.
Okay. So would you say, in hindsight, people
If I heard,
don't do that?
If I heard all things work together for good for them, to those
Yeah.
that love God one more time, I was going to scream.
Yeah, that is not a
I
verse
knew
that
it in my head that it's true,
Yep.
but I didn't want to hear it at the time.
it's not
What
what
I
you hear.
wanted to say was, when your child is dead, I'll come and tell you that and see how you feel.
Yeah.
It's not very sanctified of me, but it was something that really bothered me.
So what was
it hurt.
Yeah. So what was something that was helpful?
The day that it happened, I had a friend who came over, and she feels very uncomfortable with this. She's told me that she just felt like she was a failure, but she sat on her knees on the floor and never said a word. Not one word.
she was just there.
She was just there.
Yep.
And for some reason, I find tremendous strength in that, because my whole life had just spun totally out of control, and my living room was full of people coming and going, and people wanting to hug me, and she just sat there. And every time I looked at her, she just seemed so peaceful, and I felt peaceful too. I don't know what it was. It just sitting with someone,
Susan and I have
crying.
often said that, when Job's 3 friends came, the best thing they could ever do was just sit there and say nothing for those 7 days. It wasn't when they opened their mouths, that's when the problem started. And, I think there's a lesson to be learned from that. We need to learn, the Bible says we sorrow with those who sorrow, we grieve with those who grieve. And sometimes that just means being quiet, being silent, and just... Susan has often said that at church, just somebody putting their hand on your shoulder
Don't
without
hug
saying
me.
a word. Don't
Yeah.
hug me. Don't, because then the tears start to come.
Yeah.
And after a while, that becomes exhausting.
Yep.
Grief is exhausting.
Yep.
But just a hand on the shoulder, is just saying, we remember you.
Yep.
We're thinking about you. We're praying for you. We love you.
Yep.
That
But
meant
some
more
people,
than anything.
some people just have a gift. I mean, we have one couple in our church, and they, for Easter or for Christmas or for birthdays or anything, she'll send a box of chocolates, and she'll often say, "Just in memory of Catherine," and it's like, oh, that's so sweet. She
Or people that
remembers.
send flowers on the anniversary of Catherine's death.
Or her birthday.
Even 3 years later,
Yeah.
that's powerful. That people still remember, because everybody is overwhelmed when it first happens. You get this huge outpouring of sorrow and condolence and emails and cards and flowers, and then it just all disappears within a few weeks. It's just nothing, and then you have to just walk that path yourself, and it's, as I said, it's a lonely
and it's intensely
journey.
personal as well. I mean, Jack has said we grieve differently, and even today, I need to talk my way through everything, because in talking it out, it makes sense to me.
Yep.
And Jack's not that way, so he'll be quiet, and my constant talking about things can irritate him, and his silence can irritate me. Not irritate, hurt, I think is the word. So, I mean, they talk about the statistics being quite high for couples breaking up after you lose a child. And I understand why. Because you're grieving the same loss, but you're doing it very, very differently.
And men grieve differently
Yeah.
than women.
Yeah.
Mothers grieve differently than fathers. It's just a fact.
Well, I think that everything that I did afterwards, if I did laundry, initially Catherine's laundry was there. That was excruciatingly painful. But then when I didn't have laundry for her anymore, that was
painful,
worse,
yes.
right? If I clean the house, it's for Catherine. Like, it's partly, it was for the family, but it was partly for her. So everything I did involved Catherine. And of course we homeschooled. So she was home with me all the time. I was so used to seeing her there. So for us, it was a huge thing. Like, and I know it seems strange, but I remember when the police told me, I mean, one of the first things I said to them was, "You don't understand. I'm not just like a regular mom. Like, I don't know how other moms get through this, but I'm not a regular mom. Like Catherine and I were really close.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't even last one day without her. Like, you're telling me I have to last a lifetime without her, and I can't do it.
Yeah.
And I know that, so initially I would say, you know, you talk about anger, you talk about feeling cocooned in God's love, you talk about all those things, but ultimately my one overriding feeling certainly at the beginning was, I knew I still had a husband and 5 children here, but I wanted to die.
Yeah.
I was not suicidal,
Yeah.
but I wanted to die. I wanted the pain to end. It was my birthday in May, so just a few months after Catherine died, and I remember so many people wishing me a happy birthday. And finally, this one man in our church who Catherine was extraordinarily close to, and she called him Grandpa, and he wished me a happy birthday, and he says, I hope you have many more. And I remember just saying, Peter, don't say that. I can't do any more. Like, this is too hard. I never want to have another birthday. Yeah. But, you know, you have those moments, but I remember within days of Catherine dying, I said to Jack, we need to be happy again. Like, we have to get there. We have to be happy for the sake of our other children as well.
And you would say you've got there again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kids too.
Yeah. But I would say in some ways my happiness is always tinged with brokenness and sadness, always. But I would also say that my joy is deeper in some things. Like, Catherine's death has taught me a lot. It's taught me to appreciate little things. And it's also taught me to see through a different lens, to see this earth as a lot more temporary than I ever saw it before. And I'm always looking forward to that day when I can go and be with the Lord and see Catherine again, but primarily be with the Lord. But even that is not the end. I mean, the actual end is the day of judgment, and God will create a new heaven and new earth, and the holy city will come down, this new Jerusalem, and that will be real heaven. Yeah. So in a way, I comfort myself saying, Catherine's not there yet. She's there, but she's still waiting. Yeah. She's still waiting for something else, and I'm waiting. I'm further behind her, but we're both waiting. We're still waiting for that day. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Just to go back a little bit on people being helpful, just as in a precursor, I was in Alberta a couple months ago, and all week no one asked about Grace passing away. And then one couple did near the end of the trip, and I was so excited. I was like, sweet, like, thank you for asking. Like, I got to talk about it. So I encourage people to ask. On the same token, if someone would have asked me every single day that week I was visiting Alberta, I would have been thankful for someone not asking at the end of the week. So there is also no handbook. And every time you're in a different spot. And
everyone's different.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So what would be very special for me is not very special even for Jack. Right. Yeah. Because we're all different. And we all go through different stages.
Nancy Guthrie, was it Nancy Guthrie?
Nancy Guthrie has written a book
called The Silliest Things People Say.
No, what grieving people wish you knew. About grief or something like that. But
it was really helpful to teach people how to deal with people who are grieving from a Christian perspective.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is don't fix them.
Yeah. Don't try to make them happy again.
Yeah. Okay. They're never going to be the same. Yeah. And that's okay. It is okay.
People try to make you feel happy again, but it's not helpful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Lord gives that happiness and joy in His own time and in His own way.
Don't ask some questions, but not too many.
Yeah.
I mean, when people asked if Catherine was wearing a helmet, I find that really, really disconcerting. Yeah. Because, you know, the gossip mill had said, well, her helmet was found, you know, a little bit away from where she was. So, you know, what did she not have it on properly? Now, the coroner said that she did have it on. Some of her injuries were actually consistent with having the helmet on. So there was nothing more certain in his mind that she had her helmet on, and on securely. But knowing that people are talking about those things, it can make you very frustrated and feel hurt again. Yeah. I would also say don't hug everyone. I mean, I know that's your natural tendency, but not everybody's a hugger. No,
I'm definitely not. So.
Right? And sometimes, especially like, you know, when you're out in public, sometimes you're putting on a brave face to be out there, and it's something fun you're doing with your kids. Yeah. And, you know, grief is oppressive, especially for kids. You can't grieve all the time. the kids need a break. And we had a couple from our church who actually gave us a vacation for, I think it was 4 nights or something at their timeshare. And it was a gift because our kids were able to go out where no one would see them, and they could actually laugh and they could actually have a good time.
And I feel guilty for laughing.
And not feel guilty that somebody's going to see them. And there were a lot of tears on that trip. Don't get me wrong, but it was just nice to have a break. Grief is oppressive, especially for kids. You can't grieve all the time.
Yeah. So, especially for Catherine, who you believe is in with the Lord and in heaven, if you had the option to have her back now, knowing she's in a perfect place, how do you? Like, I think about that with Grace a little bit too. Like I don't need to worry about Grace because I need to worry about Malachi, my other child.
Catherine died on a Saturday, and we went to church on Sunday morning.
Wow.
Not all of us.
Okay.
The two youngest, their grief hit right away. And so they didn't want to go. And so Jack stayed home with them in the morning, and I went with the oldest 3. And then we switched at night. I stayed home with the youngest 2, and then Jack went with the oldest 3. John Cocooned preached a sermon from Isaiah 40. He shall gather the lambs in his arms. And he came over to the house afterwards to see how we were. And he said, I hope that sermon was brought you some comfort. And I just looked at him and I said, John, I hope that will bring me comfort. It was a beautiful sermon. And I do hope that it brings me comfort. And I'm sure it will. But I said, right now, if I could snatch her out of his arms, I would. I have sat by her grave and demanded that God send her back.
Our kids on Easter Sunday, that was a few months after Catherine passed away, the first Easter, they were outside and Susan didn't know where they were, and they came back in the house, and you said
they looked kind of sheepish
Yeah.
because I was frantic at that point because I couldn't find them. And then they came back and they looked kind of sheepish. And I said, where were you? Well, we don't want to say. It's like, where were you? It's like, well, what were you doing? No, I don't want to tell you. It's like, just tell me, right? Like Mama Bear's like,
Yeah.
And then, their little tear-streaked faces, they just said, well, we were praying that the Lord would, bring Catherine alive again. And because, it's Resurrection Sunday. And we thought this would be a good time. So your heart just kind of breaks for them. But
I think we all want her back.
Yeah, of course.
yeah.
But then your theological mind, if I can put it that way, kicks in and says, yeah, but Catherine wouldn't want to come back.
No.
Right? And that's hard, to think that she wouldn't want to come back. It's hard to think that she is in a glorified state. We're not. And so we're like, well, Catherine, like, why wouldn't you want to come back, right?
Yeah.
Like, we have no grasp of what that is. But when you understand something of what it must be like to be in a glorified state, then you can't say I want them back. I've come to grips with the fact that this life is so short. It's a wink of an eye compared to eternity. And if the Lord spares me until I'm 80, 85, even 90 years of age, what is that compared to eternity? Can I live the next 30, 40 years without Catherine, knowing that I'll be with her and with the Lord forever? Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
It's a wink of an eye.
Yeah. But it takes a while to get there, too.
It does. It does.
I remember one thing that really bothered me at the time, and this may seem very strange, but right away you felt very comforted by the fact that she was in heaven and would be resurrected one day, and that we would live with her for an eternity. He found tremendous comfort in that, and I didn't, because my feeling was I could not bear the thought that she was alive and happy without me.
Okay.
And again, it's maybe just a mom thing, but
Yeah.
I hated that thought.
Still hate it?
No, not at all. But
Okay.
honestly, for the first few weeks, I didn't even want to think of her as being in heaven. It just bothered me. I didn't want her to be anywhere else but with me and with us as a family. And, but I think now, obviously I wouldn't want her back either, because the more I study heaven, the more I would never bring her back here. This is such a broken world, and it's so sad. And it's not just Catherine. It's so many people have lost children. So many people are sick. So many people have really awful trials, and this world is not what it should be. And so you do yearn for something better. So I wouldn't want to bring her back for that. But I think the other thing is, I remember saying to people, if God gave me the option, if he said, Susan, I will send Catherine back. But in order to do that, I will erase all the sadness you felt, all the struggling that you went through, and that sense of my love and that deep communion with me and that time where you needed my word even more than you needed food, like actual food. Yep. I'm going to take all of that away, and you can have Catherine back. Or I'll keep Catherine, and you can still have that feeling of, that connection with God, that communion with God. And I think if you did that, I would say, no, I don't want Catherine back. Because what I've learned is, no matter what I said to the police officers that day, I can live without Catherine, and I can laugh again, and I can really enjoy life again. And I really joy in my other children. I can live without Catherine. And even if the Lord took away another one of my children or my husband, or I was sick or anything else, I know I can live through that. But I can't live without him. And that's what I've learned. And you say that as a Christian, you say that for years and years, but it's not until the rubber hits the road that you really believe it. Yeah. And you believe it with your whole heart. Yeah. So.
And you could probably say that for all types of suffering that people are going through, that is the solution. I mean, we kind of mentioned it already, but it's interesting you say it's a broken world. I read a quote this week that said, the good old days were everything prior to Genesis 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was actually the only good old days.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it's still all brokenness. After that, it's all brokenness.
It is.
Any silver linings in this thing that you've learned? Like, I'm sure you've talked to other people that have lost children and stuff like that, and you've been able to help them. I think that's a silver lining in a way, that you're able to give comfort to other people and help them. Anything else that came out of this that you didn't think losing a daughter would give you? Eternal perspective. I know you mentioned that you feel less attached to this world.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, that is probably the biggest thing, just to constantly look forward to that day when all of the tears will be wiped away and all the sadness will be erased and all the wrong things will be made right, and the Lord will be vindicated. And I mean, that really comes alive for you. That is definitely one of the biggest lessons for me.
And that there will be no more death. Mm-hmm. In the new heaven and the new earth. Like, I think sometimes we as Christians don't realize enough what is waiting for us. I don't think we appreciate it enough. It's so wonderful. You can't put it into words. When Paul saw the third heaven, he was forbidden to speak about it, and I've often wondered why. Why was he forbidden to speak about it? Maybe because it was just so wonderful that
I don't think there would be vocabulary to describe it.
No, and he even says, "Eye has not seen nor ear heard." Right?
Nor but I think too, if we had any idea of what it was, I mean, we'd just kill ourselves and want to go, right? No, but you would think, how can I wait then if this is awaiting me, right? Like how would you have patience to live out the rest of your days, right?
I think it's both with hell and heaven. I know Nabil Qureshi, who has also passed away now, but he wrote the book Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus.
One of Catherine's favorite books.
Yes.
By the way.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah. Yes.
But he said in an interview, he goes, Christians either don't believe what they say they believe, or they hate us. Mm-hmm. And he said that before he became a Christian. He goes, because if you really believe in hell, you'd go talk to us in the world about the need to believe what you say you believe, or you don't really believe it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just not the case about hell, but also just as much about heaven. Absolutely. That if you love people, you want them to go to that place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think another thing is just maybe just a little bit more dissatisfaction with the world.
More dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm. I think you do realize you get a better, deeper sense maybe of
How empty it
just
is.
how broken it is and how unsatisfying it is.
Yep.
It's not meant to be home, and yet we settle down very comfortably as if it were home. So I think something like that really changes your perspective on that. As you said, we've had a lot of opportunity to speak to people who have lost children. Interestingly, though, a lot of times people will say, "Oh, somebody lost a child, call Susan," or call Jack. And that's not always, I wouldn't say it's not always fair. It's exhausting to walk through grief with someone else too, because it brings a lot back. But I think the other thing is, because everybody who loses a child is totally different circumstances. It could be the same circumstances, but it's a different relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different child.
And it's a different child.
Like, just
right?
because you lose a child doesn't make you an expert
No.
in how to grieve for a child.
Or child losing.
We're not experts. We're
I think
it's one day at a
yeah.
time, and so it is for every parent. And to think that just because we've lost a child that we have all the answers,
No.
it's not true.
I think Nancy Guthrie actually mentions, and to get back to your question about how others can help, she says the one thing that you should never say is "I understand" or "I get it," and it's really true. That is the one thing that bothers our kids too. When people will say, "Oh yeah, I lost my grandmother, so I totally get," it's like, no, you don't. You have no clue.
Yeah.
And even recently, I had someone say that, and it was like, no, you don't.
But even people who lost a child, they didn't lose our child,
No.
That's right.
right? Yeah. And we didn't lose their child.
Or you lose someone.
Every death is different.
You lose someone at 40 or 15. That's
Yeah.
different.
That's also,
It's
Yeah.
everything's different.
So I always say to people, I don't know, I have no idea what you're feeling, but I know something of your pain.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a better way of saying things. So we learned that. I think the other thing I learned was, this is getting, I suppose, really personal, is I think two things. The first one is I didn't have favorites. I love all my children equally. When Catherine died, I loved her by far the most, because you yearn for the child you can't have. Mm-hmm. So I had 5 children still here. The day that the police told us that Catherine had died and she was still at Manning Park, I wanted to go to Manning Park. I needed to go to Manning Park. The police officer said, "No, you need to stay here. Your husband and 3 kids are coming and from Vancouver, and your 2 boys are coming from Manning Park. You need to be here. The family needs to be together." And I remember saying, "No, but I need to be with Catherine." And they said, "No, you don't." But I needed to be with her. I yearned to be with her. I knew that I had 5 children still at home that needed me desperately, and yet I really wanted to die and just have it all over, because I wanted to be with Catherine again. Like, I yearned for her. Like, there's nothing that can fill that void. You need the one you can't have. So that's the one thing I learned, was I know people say, well, it's not healthy if they're always talking about the child who died. Let them just go. That's a stage. It balances out again. Just let them go through it. Let people talk. And even if they tell you the same stories 25 times, let them talk. It's in the talking that healing takes place. So just let people talk. I have a really good friend from Ontario, and she phoned me regularly. Well, she still does, but she has phoned me so many times, and we'll get on the phone, we'll talk for an hour, and I get off the phone and realize I haven't even asked her how she's doing or how her husband is. And she never tried to butt in and say, "Yeah, what happened at work?"
Yeah.
It was all about me.
Yeah.
How are the kids? How are you? How's Jack? And I would just talk. And I would say she was probably the most helpful for me. She just let me talk, and she let me be selfish. Mm. There's a certain selfishness in grief, because you can't see anyone else's at that point. You can just, it's just an overwhelming pain that you feel. So I think that's...
the key here is listening, though.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And I think, so the other thing then that I was going to say, and this is what gets really personal, is another silver lining is sometimes when things kind of go wrong, or maybe they're not going wrong, maybe you're just going through a bit of a flat spot in your life, like in your relationship with the Lord or whatever. Sometimes I would have struggled with, well, if there's all this bad stuff still in my life, and maybe I'm not really a Christian, and maybe I'm deceiving myself, and maybe I don't know, just maybe I'm just not really who I think I am, and I would really struggle with that. And I don't anymore, and I don't think I ever will.
Like you struggled with that prior to?
I struggled with that prior, even though, I think most people would never have thought that of me, but I just privately, I did struggle. I know we had a lot of conversations through the years. It wasn't all the time.
Yeah.
It really wasn't. It was just every now and again I would, hear a sermon or something, and you read the story of Judas and how was he with the Lord, and just wasn't a Christian, and I know we talked about it a lot, and sometimes I was really almost distraught, like what if this is just all me deceiving myself or whatever, like just that real struggle. And I know, I don't think I will ever struggle again, because I have seen and felt the great love that God has for me. And so that is definitely a silver lining.
It's a big gift, yeah.
It's a huge gift. So, yeah.
I think the biggest takeaway I think people can have for this, or should have from this, is that in this type of suffering, but in all types of suffering, the really only solution is the gospel.
It makes sense.
I don't know how parents who aren't believers get through the death of a child.
They do. A lot of them do, and I respect them. They're amazing people.
But they don't get through it in the way that believers do. Because what happens in the case of an unbeliever is, okay, it happened, but there's nothing. There's just this void. Whereas with Christians, we still have hope. We have hope that we'll see our loved ones again. We have hope that we're going to enter into a new heaven and a new earth where there is no more sickness and no more death and no more disease, and we'll live forever. And I mean, the unbeliever doesn't have that hope.
Yeah.
And yet, I think with God's grace, He does enable parents to recover, even if they're not Christians and they don't trust in Him. And so that's just His Grace that He gives to them too. Yeah. But one thing I did learn, I came across a quote very early on, and I thought it was a stunning quote, and it really has become true for me. And it was from Augustine, so like one of the early church fathers.
400 after Christ.
And he said, "In my deepest wound, I saw your glory, Lord, and it dazzled me."
Wow.
And
Dazzled.
and that is something that quote has become so dear to me. It's truly been amazing. Like, you see a side of God that.
But that's the story of Job, right? I mean, at the end of Job, right, he sees this vision of God, and God displays His glory and His sovereignty, and Job feels this high, right?
Yep.
Well, he says at one point before, and Job was an upright man. I mean, the Bible says that God said there's no one like him, basically, and yet. But Job says, "Before I had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you."
Wow.
Right. Yeah. So that's what suffering did for Job.
Yep.
I compare it to Jacob wrestling with God at Peniel. I mean, God allowed Jacob to wrestle with him physically. I mean, obviously it was no match at all. I mean, God would have won, right? But He allowed Jacob to do that. And He wrestled with him face to face. And I would say that that's what I did that's what I've been doing for the last 3.5 years, is there are things that as I say, I was never angry with God. I'm very thankful for that. But there were questions that I had to work through. One of our daughters really struggled with prayer for a while. I prayed for safety for Catherine at Manning Park. Why did the Lord not answer that? Because God has a different way of viewing safety. We just wanted safety so she'd come back home with us. But then we had to pray for safety all the time. God says, I'll take her. I'll put her in my arms. I'll keep her there. She'll be safe. It's a different way of looking at it. But but you have to wrestle through those things. And the interesting thing about Jacob is that after he struggled, he was a different man. He was a completely changed man, but he always walked with a limp. So you'll always have that scar.
Yep.
You've wrestled with God. You'll always be scarred. He'll heal you, but you'll always bear the scar.
Well, and it was a permanent reminder to him of his own weakness.
Right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
And he had to lean on. I preached on it once, and I just imagined, the sun was coming up right at the end of that night of wrestling, and I just imagined Jacob, walking off, with the sun blazing in the horizon, and there he is. He's limping, but he's leaning on the Lord as he limps. And that's a picture of the believer, really. When you go through trial, when you go through suffering, you're limping for the rest of your life, but you're doing that leaning upon him.
And I know a lot of people will say, they'll dismiss Christianity by saying it's a crutch.
Yeah.
And I say, look, it's not. It's real. I mean, I have proved it to be real.
Yeah.
Absolutely. God is real. And God is a very present help in time of trouble. That's what the Bible says. And I know that to be true. But I would say, look, for people who say it's a crutch, even if it was a crutch, I'd take it. Really, if there was no eternal life and it was just God's help in this life alone, I mean, I know people have said if there was no eternity, Christians would be miserable. But I would say, even if there was no eternity, even if you didn't believe that, but I could experience God's help right here, and that childlike trust in him when Catherine died, because I literally felt like I was drowning. I felt like there was no sure foundation under my feet, except for the things that I kept telling myself, which was God is still good, and God is still kind, and God is still God, and he's still good, and he's faithful, and he's promised, and there's resurrection, and there's hope. And so even if it is a crutch, wonderful.
Yeah.
It's still worth it.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's real. It
real,
really is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I really appreciate you guys coming on and talking about this. I know it's not easy to talk about, but hopefully it's helpful to other people as well that are suffering. Maybe not the suffering of losing a child, but other types of suffering and how to work through that. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please leave us a 5-star review and tell your friends and family about this show. We have new episodes every other Friday. We are available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow this show on Instagram and Facebook at the handle @FuriouslyCuriousShow.